Ritesh, I just must simply say I'm a little disappointed because usually you have the nerve center of Tatooine as your background. So this is a little boring now. I don't know what's going on, but it's
It,
I'm just
it
teasing, of
can,
course. It's
the power of technology is such
there we go.
that I can move from planet to planet very, very quickly.
Right on cue. Right on cue. Well, look, I have two old friends and a new friend here. Robin, we just met recently, and it's great to have you here. And Ritesh and Cheryl, I've known you a little while now, and it's again same conversation I just had with Ahmed. I can't wait till I can see you all in person, and we can do this in person. But thanks for joining us. We're going to talk about innovation. We're going to go around the horn very briefly. So kind of name, rank, serial number if you can. Cheryl, we'll start with you, and then we'll get into the conversation.
All right, great. So I'm Cheryl. Unfortunately, I don't really have a rank and serial number right now. As I mentioned, I used to be the lead for our digital health investing at a firm called Blue Run Ventures, where I did a number of digital health investments. I actually left late last year, my timing is impeccable, to launch a new investment platform specifically focused on digital health and wellness. So I've had the great opportunity to work with Ritesh. Looking forward to working with Robin, but we'll have more to unveil soon. But I strongly feel that the space is ready, can have some real dedicated dollars. So yeah, looking forward to it, but that's my update for now.
Great, Cheryl. Thrilled about your new venture. Can't wait to hear more about it when you come out of stealth. Robin, please introduce yourself.
Absolutely. So Robin Roberts, I'm the co-founder and chief operating officer for the Novartis Biome. I had a rank and serial number, but I won't share that. There it is. But I've been at Novartis since 2008. I have actually had the pleasure of starting a couple of ventures within the organization. So have some experience being a bit of an entrepreneur and starting these organizations within large, we could say, conglomerates that are in very much in a matrix type of formation. So happy to be a part of the panel and super excited to get to know all of you a bit better. Ritesh, we're already old friends, so but I think everybody's an old friend with Ritesh. So.
Yeah, he does know everybody, even people on Tatooine. Ritesh, please introduce yourself.
Well, first of all, it's so good to hang out with some friends after the week I've had. So thank you for taking the time today. So Ritesh Patel, I work at Ogilvy Consulting, know all of you very well. So it's good to see you. And I'm like you, Drew, I do miss the holding a cocktail in hand and getting to chat with people in person. So I'm looking forward to that. I work very closely with folks, big corporations, innovations. I also work with startups and, work with people like Cheryl on the VC side as well and the funding side of the business. So looking
That's great.
Conversation.
Yeah, me too. And let's jump right in, Ritesh. I know every time we talk, I'm always, so impressed how you just have this great view broadly of the industry and the ecosystem. I know you're very humble and you don't like people talking about you that way, but it always impresses me. So what I wanted to do is just give this a quick sort of 2 minutes, if you will, and lay out this landscape for us about where we are, particularly post-pandemic, right? In terms of the core parts of the ecosystem, payer, provider, pharma, or manufacturer, and just, what's going on at each of those points in the ecosystem? What are their pain points? What are they trying to solve? What are they trying to innovate? But just give us a quick overview of the landscape.
So, as Amit said earlier in the conversation you were having, there's so much change going on. What the pandemic has done that I've seen is forced a lot of stuff that people were talking about for a long time and made it a reality. So if you look at pharma, for years, we've been talking about digital engagement with our customers, changing the way we engage with our customers, looking at content that we do that should be different for our customers. And you know what? We couldn't call on our customers. So guess what? We had to figure this out. We had to figure out a way to digitally engage with the healthcare professional. We had to figure out, because the rep, who was the main point of contact for a lot of manufacturers, was not able to get into the building to see a doctor because they were on lockdown and full PPE, and only essential workers could get into the building. So, some of those changes have been dropped upon us, and all of a sudden Viva emails became the big thing last March.
Yeah.
Boom, all these emails started going out, from rep triggered emails as they were known, from the pharma industry. And I think gradually, as the pandemic settled in, unfortunately, the marketers have figured out that there are things they need to do differently. And it's on the payer side, we've got the same issue going. A lot of people aren't taking care of themselves. The chronic diseases, they couldn't get into the buildings, right? So, that sort of stopped and ground to a halt. So how do I take the hospital to the home? How do I do remote patient monitoring? How do I make that patient who's a chronic patient do something in the house, right? So I've seen some great little things. I've got downstairs in the kitchen a red bag. It's Mount Sinai at home, or, the home kit. And it's got everything in it. There's a blood pressure thing, there's an EKG, there's a connected thermometer, there's all of the $200 for the whole bag, right? So send one of those to the house of chronic patients, and now you can do remote patient monitoring, right? So really interesting times, I think. So I think we're all engaging and looking at new ways and models and taking advantage that technology was already there, connected devices, remote capabilities, and now using them, actually getting them used in the marketplace. On the health system side, everyone's focused on digital front doors. How do I get the patient back in? What kind of tools can I create? That crappy Epic portal is being replaced, finally. They've been talking about it for centuries, but it's finally being replaced with a user interface that is consumer friendly, that is patient friendly. You can check your bill, you can make an appointment, you can check if your radiology's tests are in, all of those things that we consumers craved. It's just starting to happen now. So that's what I love about this. As you know, Drew, for 10 years, my thing is, if it moves, digitize it. And so finally they're doing it,
And easier said than done in your world sometimes.
Exactly.
Right? But and I did see a question someone asked. They wanted the name of the bag again. It's a Mount Sinai bag, you said, yes?
Yeah, it's the company is called MD Live Kit. Started by a couple of doctors at Mass General and a couple of guys out of Sweden. And it's a red kit, that comes in, and you can have it delivered to your house, but the hospitals are buying it and sending it to chronic patients. So
that's great. So Cheryl and Robin, I want to build a little bit off of Ritesh's sort of overview. Cheryl, I'll start with you. And one thing we didn't talk too much there, specifically about sort of the startup ecosystem, and you're staying very squarely in this space as an investor. So I'm curious of this sort of ecosystem and landscape that Ritesh laid out so nicely. What are the areas that startups and disruptors and money in the valley and money anywhere, what areas are you looking to disrupt? What areas do you think you can disrupt and change for the better? So where are you going to be putting your money? But what's the valley thinking, and what are investors thinking in health tech about what you can change?
Yeah, so there's definitely a ton of money going into the space. There seems to be more and more every day, and I think what you're seeing is a little bit of a barbell right now. So you saw some very late stage rounds get done, growth rounds at incredible multiples, and and I think the good thing with some of those rounds is that the playbooks for those businesses have actually already been established, right? So selling to self-insured employers, starting to work with plans. And so it's nice to see that there's actually growth equity to make those companies staying powers. A lot of that is actually in chronic disease management. It's, as Ritesh mentioned, it is going to be a large cost center for us as a country overall. And so finding ways to manage those diseases remotely is a huge area for venture to look at. But on the earlier stage side, where I spend a lot of my time, we are looking at a lot of voice technology as a way for diagnostics, but then also looking at it from the perspective of customer service, right? So are there digital tools that patients will want to use to engage with their physicians. And one of the areas that I'm seeing is people are starting to segment out their digital health solutions into either vertical markets based on therapy, or also like splicing and dicing the patient segments. So I am thinking a lot about like, how does Gen X want to interact with healthcare versus Gen Z? And
Right.
it's very different. And so the way that we go to market with these businesses and products are also very different. I would be remiss to say that in COVID, there's been a huge emphasis on mental health. I think there will continue to be an emphasis on mental health. I will say I'm a little bit concerned by like this incredible proliferation of mental health digital startups. And I think we have to be very careful as a community to really drive towards clinical outcomes. But I do think it was historically underfunded. And so now you're seeing this course correction. I can't say at this time, is it too many? There's a lot, and which means there's just a lot of noise. And so there's this challenge for me as an investor of like signal to noise ratio, like, you know, like what really works, what doesn't. And Robin probably sees even more of that stuff. But yeah, that's a lot of the areas that I'm looking at.
That's great, and I know we'll dig into some of that too. And Robin, maybe sort of answering the pharma side of the question, but please do start just a little bit of background on what Biome is. You have a great global footprint, and what's the mission of Biome, and then let's lead into, you know, what is Novartis through whether Biome or at corporate, you know, is focusing on from an innovation standpoint to make the patient experience better, drugs more affordable, what have you. But let's start with Biome because it's a fascinating division you have there.
Yeah, absolutely. So in essence, what the Biome is, if you take it at the highest level, but most accurate description, it's really Novartis's API into the digital health ecosystem, right? So it's Novartis's ability to connect effectively with that ecosystem, but not just by having conversations and hoping that it goes somewhere, but by actually having it underpinned with a real engine that can help bring those conversations from just conversations to actual solutions that reach patients and healthcare providers that improve lives, right? And so what we focus on is filling that gap, because the reality is there haven't been very many digital health solutions that have really been scaled appropriately through you know, a life sciences company the size of Novartis, right? There's probably one or two examples, but if we think about how many are actually out there that could potentially be game changing, you know, there should be many more. And the reason that there isn't is because there's this lack of innovation process in place that makes it possible for this to happen. And what has occurred with COVID is that there's been a real awakening internally and externally as well, in that folks have understood that this is now a discussion about business continuity. It's not so much a discussion about being innovative for the sake of being innovative, right?
Right.
There, in the past, we had conversations with folks within our business, with teams within Novartis, and we were talking about an ROI that had more to do with opportunity cost as opposed to you know, to the real reason that we wanted to, you know, bring this innovation in, and it's because we understood that in the very near future, not too distant future, but very near future, this would be a requirement in order to be able to engage effectively with the end users, with the whether it be the patients or the healthcare providers, or whether it be to effectively be able to produce therapies that are life-saving, as we, you know, intend to do and want to continue to do over the next, you know, 100 or 200 years.
That's great. And yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
No, please, go ahead. It's all right.
Well, you know, as we talk about innovation, you know, there are biomes all over the world, and we have a lot of people sort of in the open innovation front on this call or on the roundtable here viewing. You know, you just moved out to the Bay Area, so I'm curious, for someone who co-founded Biome, and now you are just arrived into, you know, Silicon Valley broadly, and all of this brain power and this amazing ecosystem. I'm curious, what's the first thing you want to do, particularly in the context of maybe 10 years ago, companies would have moved to the Valley. Hey, we opened up a lab, and, you know, it's good for a press release, and it's a little bit of innovation theater, and That's pretty cool. But you're talking about business continuity. You're talking about bringing new products and solutions to market. So in that context, as someone who founded Biome, now just jumping into the Valley personally where you live, I'm curious, what do you want to do first? How do you want to engage the ecosystem? Particularly short term, but particularly as you're able to get people back together in person as well.
I
And
think
don't forget the cupcakes.
Good point. So I think short term, we need to communicate effectively exactly what the biome is, right? There's the assumption, and I can't blame anybody for making the initial assumption that we're any other accelerator or incubator that's out there, right? And we work very, very similar to what an accelerator or incubator would work like. And we're not. I mean, we're similar in some ways, but we're different in very key ways, right? So I'll describe two of them just very briefly. So one is we're a problem-led solutioning organization. And what I mean by that is in, let's say, 90% plus of the situations where we go out and engage with digital health companies, we're engaging them with a problem in hand. We're engaging them with a post conversation with the business that says, we have a specific problem that we want to solve, that we want to sponsor, in essence, through the biome innovation process to get it to scale, right? It is not a outreach into the ecosystem that is looking for the next big shiny thing that is going to be cool for everyone and then hoping to sell it back into our organization. Because at the end of the day, my experience is 9 out of 10 times that doesn't lead anywhere, right? And it's a kind of a waste of everyone's time. The other is that we don't require any equity for companies to engage within the biome, right? So when we designed the biome organization, we sat down and we thought to ourselves, how many roadblocks can we remove from that sits between us and the potentially life-saving solution we want to bring to scale, right? And one of them, and we identified many, but one of them was, this usual requirement by incubators and accelerators to, give 6% or so of your company. Sometimes those companies just don't have that equity to give, or don't want to give that equity, or may not understand the value proposition in partnering with a company like Novartis. We don't want any of those things to be roadblocks in getting these solutions in the hands of patients and healthcare providers.
And I'm also curious, before I want to transition and I'll have Ritesh lead the conversation a little bit because he knows a lot more than I do. But I'm curious in terms of sort of the open innovation best practices and just through your broader experiences with Biome around the world, because there are many around the world. If someone says, okay, like, I've got in the next 90 days or 180 days, I can do something, I can start, what has worked? Is it, okay, we did a hackathon or now challenge and we opened that up, or, we went to the universities first. That's where we started. We started with the universities, or we went to the startup ecosystem first, or, what's your advice in terms of best practices is a good place to start? What's really worked well for you in terms of engaging an ecosystem, and then that turns into real world sort of products or solutions?
So I don't know if this is the answer that you'd normally be looking for a question like that, but to me, it's really understanding the differences between the different ecosystems, right? So the reason we have biomes in different parts of the world is because we understood very quickly that the digital health ecosystem wasn't based solely in San Francisco. It wasn't based solely in Israel. It wasn't based solely in Johannesburg. It wasn't. There's a level of expertise, a level of talent, a nuance to each and every single one of the ecosystems that are out there. And so understanding the differences between all of them gives you better perspective as to where you're most likely to find the right solution to solve the right problem that's actually going to be impactful for patients and healthcare providers.
That's great. And Cheryl, just before we go to Ritesh, do you have thoughts on best, practices and advice for larger companies that might be coming in to a place like Silicon Valley or other sort of ecosystem epicenters? And how do you work? How do you engage with people like yourself and startups? What's the best way to do that?
Yeah, I can talk about that, but I actually want to just acknowledge like what Robin said is really important, because what we see as like a culture in Silicon Valley doesn't exactly replicate into other parts of the country or in other parts of the world. And so the fact that their biome program is very adaptable for the local market is very, very important. Like, even for me, talking to a team in Israel versus in Australia versus here in the US, in New York versus San Francisco, the deals are different, the company DNAs are different. And so that is really important if you really want to further the startup ecosystem or entrepreneurship. With regard to kind of working with the larger companies, to be honest, I actually warn really young companies to be very specific when they go to engage a large company like Novartis. Like, it is a non-trivial to go and say, I'm going to go through Novartis's procurement system. And it's nothing like specifically against Novartis. I say the same thing again about Procter and Gamble. I say the same thing. I mean, all the big companies. And you also, as a young company, as a startup, you see this large potential contract or partnership, and it's very easy to become derailed in your kind of true north. This is where I want my company to be in 3 years, 5 years, because you have this partner that's so big. And that can be dangerous. It could be amazing for everybody, but you just have to be very, very careful. And so I usually like to see my companies have a little bit more meat on the bone before they go and engage with a larger company like Novartis, just because they've worked out their playbook a little bit more. They also have more resources on staff to be able to deliver the level of service that a partner like Novartis will demand. Not because like Robin's demanding, it's just like the order of magnitude between, small 10-person company and Novartis is just too big. So I usually like to wait. I would generally not suggest, a seed or Series A company, go guns blazing into work with a large company, with a few exceptions, right? I think there are some exceptions in AI, machine learning. I think there's some exceptions in more horizontal technologies that could really benefit from going into a biome and saying, like, what are all the different applications within pharma that we should be thinking about that we haven't thought about before? But if it's just pure like channel and partnership, I would generally recommend wait.
I think if I can just comment on that really quickly, Drew. I think there's two really great points that Cheryl just made there, that I have that are parts of conversations that I have with with startups all the time that we engage with. One is be super specific about the use case that you're solving, right? I can't tell you how many times I've had conversations with companies that and they may very well be right, but they're like, we can do X, Y, Z, and then everything, prior to that. And it's like, great, that might be true, but that is going to be, that's going to paralyze you in the process of getting you to where you want to go, right? So we want to be really specific about the use case that you're solving. And the other piece is, one of the key roadblocks, and we had to really take a look internally to ourselves within Novartis when we were creating the biome, and we had to say, what are the things that are preventing us from being able to work effectively with these small companies? Normally, they're small companies. We're indifferent to. I mean, we work with Amazon as well as we work with a company that was created at a hackathon. But for the most part, it's small tech companies. And what prevents us from being able to work with them? And one of the key pieces that we identified was procurement, right? Telling a company that's been existing for 6 months, that has 3 people in it, that might have this, unbelievable solution that we know if we can just get it in the hands of HCPs, they're going to get the data that they need to really make constructive decisions that are going to change patient lives. Telling them that there's a 9-month procurement process just to be able to work with you is usually a non-starter, right? Usually the look that I get is kind of a look like I'm lying.
Well, you probably run out of cash in month 6 if you do.
Yeah, exactly. You'd be around in 9 months.
Exactly. And then the next conversation they have with me is, my runway is like 4 months. I don't even know if I'm going to exist in 9 months, right?
Exactly.
So the key thing we had to do in creating the innovation process for the biome was to work with our procurement team to develop a more streamlined process to be able to bring these companies on board. It's not to circumvent the procurement process, because procurement is there for a reason, but it's different when you're talking to a multi-billion-dollar CRO as opposed to
right.
Two people, 6 months old, and has a brand new technology, and all they want to do is do a proof of concept to show you that they can, bring to light data that you would have never been able to see before.
Very interesting. And speaking of data, and because time has zipped by, this has been great. So we're gonna start to wrap here. But what I want to end on is Ritesh again giving us a brief overview on sort of the open data law. Because to me, the open data law is such a enabler, if you will, of so much innovation across the ecosystem. So, and it's all of our personal data too. Personally, we should all be very aware of what's going on. But Ritesh, can you give us just a quick overview on sort of the recent developments around open data and the open data law, what that means for customers, and then Cheryl and Robin, I'd love just to get your perspective on how that affects your particular worlds as it relates to health and innovation.
So quick thing, first of all, for both Robin and Cheryl's point, and for those new companies that may be on, your urgency will never be the urgency of the big corporation. That's the only statement you're going to make on this, right? So just always be wary that your urgency is never the urgency of the big client that you're trying to land. On the open data rules, I would say, so they became law in November of last year. They were sort of, being talked about and whatever, but it was actually passed and it became law. And what that means is, before, if you wanted access to data within an EHR system like an Epic, it was a walled garden. You couldn't get access to it unless you paid a hefty fee of some sort, right? And there was no rhyme or reason of the fee, depending on who was calling. So if Robin called from Novartis, it was $200,000 because they know Novartis could pay it, right? But if it was Patel and Cheng Inc. that was calling to do a startup, it was $20,000. But $20,000 to a startup is still a lot of money. And so what the law does, it now says you can't do that. It has to be free and open access to this data, and you can't make it prohibitory, so that they can't charge Novartis $200,000, even though Novartis could afford it, because Novartis could say, look, we're building this thing for 10 grand and we need access to this imaging data from a lab test. That's the only thing we're looking for. And you can't charge $200,000 for that. And lawsuits can ensue, and you can actually legally now sue Epic if they did that. So that's a massive shift. And what that's going to do, I firmly believe this year, is open up a whole new set of innovators. I'm already seeing it. In the last 2 weeks, I've met with companies that are not taking data, but overlaying data on the EHR of social determinants of health, right? This person's economic capability for, you're going to prescribe this medication to them real time. I can tell you whether they can afford it or not, and whether you should give them a copay card. Never would have been able to do that before, but with this law now, you can do that, right?
That's great.
And also extract data. So I think there's going to be a whole new bunch of innovators coming out here.
Yep.
Apple's going to own it all.
Apple's going to own it all. So I'm actually getting the boot from my producers. So Cheryl and Robert, 30 seconds or less if you can. The open data law, what does it mean, Cheryl, for you and investors investing in startups? What's the opportunity?
So what I'm excited about is that it gives innovators a chance to bridge the increasing gap in healthcare access.
Yeah.
And we saw this in COVID, Robin and I have talked about it before, there's just so much inequality in healthcare right now. And if you can actually, software is the cheapest, most scalable way for you to distribute healthcare, and so if this law now makes this available in kind of like a less predatory, less punitive way, so that we can deliver that, and if the data can now be unbiased and it can be trusted, I think it opens up so many opportunities, and that's what I'm excited about.
That's great. And Robin, you get the last word here. What does this mean for a company like Novartis?
Well, it means simply that now that we have, we'll have much more access to this data, we need to be real good stewards of that data, right? We need to make sure that we're taking into account the use of that data. We're very transparent with with patients and those who have that or who own that data. and that we continue to push that forward. Now, what it means in terms of the way that we work within the biome, it means that we will have data, or we could potentially have data available for us that will allow us to run these proof of concept studies much more quickly, and be able to make quicker decisions with more with cleaner data as to whether something is ready to move forward and to scale, whether it needs to be adjusted and made fit for purpose, or whether we need to pivot from it.
That's great. Well, again, all three of you, it's great to see you. And the next time we see each other, let's continue this conversation in person at our next conference. Ritesh, you can come out to Silicon Valley and we'll hang out there. But thanks again. And yeah, thanks guys. Really appreciate it.
Thank you guys. Thank you so much.
Great. Thanks everyone.